thank you very much for joining us. And the afternoon we're going to be dedicating to kicking off the AI Standard Hub's work on trustworthy AI. I will just mention there are going to be opportunities for Q&A, so keep that slido.com in mind. We're aware we're not going to be able to answer everybody's questions, but a little bird tells me that they will be borne in mind when responses will be put up on the hub. So I don't think that's exactly a promise to deal with your exact issue, but yes, they will be read and will be noticed. So please do keep sending us in your questions. So as we heard this morning, the first thematic area that the hub's going to be working on is trustworthy AI. It's going to be the focus of the hub's activities for the next 6 months. And this afternoon, we're going to hear more about the significance of this particular thematic area, why it's been chosen as the initial focus, and what's the program of work going to look like here. We've got a panel of experts later from the UK's tech industry and startup community, the key regulator body, and the government's Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. And we're going to be hearing their reflections on the thematic area of trustworthy AI and the hub's work. But the first session this afternoon, we're going to be exploring how we can govern AI effectively and the role that technical standards can play. And we're going to be hearing the UK government's latest policy thinking on trustworthy AI. And again, discussing the role of the hub within that thinking. We've got 3 speakers from DCMS. We've got Rebecca Anselmetti. She's Senior Policy Advisor in the UK Government's Department. I don't need to say this. Let's just call it the DCMS. We could have saved a lot of paper, where she leads the government's work on AI standards policy and the delivery of the objectives set out in the National AI Strategy. We've got Nikita Bhangu, who is Head of Digital Standards Policy at DCMS, working in the Digital Standards and Internet Governance team, which brings together UK government's global engagement with key internet governance and digital standards bodies, and Rose Woolhouse, Head of International AI Governance at the UK government's Office for Artificial Intelligence, a joint unit between, I'll just call it BEIS and DCMS. For those of you overseas, I'm sorry, just look them up, okay? They're government departments. Rose oversees engagement with key multilateral forums and bilateral partners to help support the delivery of the UK's National AI Strategy. And it is Rose I'm going to be handing over to first for the first presentation. Over to you.
Great, thanks so much, and good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Rose, and I work in the UK's Office for Artificial Intelligence. So the Office for AI oversaw the development of the UK's National AI Strategy, and now we're working on its implementation. We coordinate a lot of the work happening on AI across government. We also secretariat the AI Council, and we work with a range of different stakeholders, both in the UK and internationally. Our portfolio ranges from AI skills to AI adoption to R&D, but what I'm going to focus on today is the focus at the moment on AI governance and regulation. First, just to set a bit of the wider scene, a quick overview of how we got to this stage of AI thinking. So in 2017, there was an expert review that advised setting up the AI Council, an independent advisory body with representatives from across business, research, and academia that could help advise the government on key AI issues. In 2018, there was the £1 billion sector deal to help boost AI investment in the UK. In 2021, the AI Council produced their AI roadmap with key recommendations, including the need to develop an ambitious AI strategy for the UK. And that's the work that the Office for AI took on in close collaboration with people from across government and wider stakeholder groups. This strategy was published in September 2021 and sets out a 10-year vision for what the UK is going to do to help build on and further develop the UK's AI strengths. Then, in July 2022, we published the AI regulation policy paper with a proposed AI governance approach and a call for stakeholder feedback. So that is just some of the wider context to this work and where the Standards Hub is fitting in as well. Just to say up front, and also because I work on the international portfolio, this work is not happening in a vacuum. There's an increasing amount of international AI activity happening, including in different multilateral organizations, national AI strategies and governance proposals from countries across the world, and also work happening in international technical standard setting organizations too. So we really recognize the importance of international engagement, both because a lot of the businesses who are developing and using AI are working across borders, and also because a lot of the challenges and opportunities that AI presents require international collaboration. So we're really keen to learn from different experiences and share best practices, and the UK is taking an active role in many of the organizations involved in this type of work, and we're working with a range of different countries. And this international angle is also being incorporated into our domestic work and will be part of the hub's activities too. In terms of the UK's national AI strategy, it's structured across 3 main pillars. So the first one is investing and planning in the long-term needs of the AI ecosystem. So that's looking at things like access to data, infrastructure, AI skills development. The second pillar is around supporting AI adoption, both across different regions of the UK and also across different sectors. And thirdly, and what we're focusing on today, this question around AI governance and how to make sure that there is responsible and trustworthy AI development and use happening. So a bit about the work that we've been doing on this. So firstly, we've done an analysis into the existing regulatory landscape. So the UK already has a thriving AI startup and research scene, so we wanted to understand what was working well as where changes might need to be made. So key findings were around the reputation of the UK's existing legal systems and regulators, the importance of the transparency of the regime, and a scrutiny and clear process for proposed regulation, which helps provide certainty to investors. And although not specifically written for AI, there's also existing legal and regulatory requirements that capture important aspects of its use, such as data protection law, which is important not to contradict or complicate in any new measures being brought in. As part of this work, we've also been looking at what are the different levers and mechanisms that you can use in AI governance and regulation, and standards play a big role in that. So there's a lot of work already happening, just a few examples here on the slide. Firstly, there's the algorithmic transparency standard that's currently being piloted in several public sector organizations. The Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation have also been working on an AI assurance guide and roadmap. And the reason that we're all here today, the work on the AI Standards Hub. And all of these tools are really a key part of that broader AI governance and regulation picture. However, our stakeholder engagement also raised some key challenges that need addressing, such as lack of clarity about how different laws apply to AI, which can be hard to navigate, especially for small businesses lacking legal resources. There are also some overlapping regulatory remits that can lead to contradictions or confusions. There is some inconsistency across how different regulators address AI activities in their remits and what powers they have. And lastly, AI potentially raises some risks and challenges, or could raise in the future, that the current system cannot adequately address. And so, for these reasons, we developed this proposed governance framework for AI, which is laid out in the AI regulation policy paper. And the key elements around this are supporting a context-driven approach so that it can be adapted to different uses and different sectors. The aim is to be pro-innovation and risk-based to ensure that measures are appropriate and do not unnecessarily stifle positive AI development. It also needs to be coherent and easy to understand and navigate. And lastly, being proportional and adaptable, so it can be adjusted to the changes in the technology and also issues as they emerge. And for that reason, we're proposing regulators consider lighter touch options in the first instance, such as guidance that can be refined as needed. Our approach is also based around a number of core principles that regulators will then need to adapt to the specific requirements of AI activities within their sectors, as what might be appropriate in one case might not necessarily apply in another. These are the principles that we put out in the paper for consultation. They're based around the OECD AI principles that the UK helped develop and which were adopted by many different countries, and that also helps this idea of wider international coherence in this space. And our initial proposal is to progress a non-statutory approach to keep it agile and help respond to the rapid pace of change, but this approach will also be kept under review. So the formal consultation period on the AI regulation paper ended on the 26th of September. And so emerging themes that are coming out from feedback so far is that stakeholders appreciate this nimble approach that can remain responsive to emerging risk, but also highlighted the need for regulatory coordination, ensuring this approach has the desired impact if it's not in law, and supporting cross-border collaboration. These are all issues that are being analysed, and although the formal consultation period has ended, we want this to be a consultative and iterative policy development process. So if we are very open to hearing further views, thoughts, questions, feedback, evidence, so please do get in contact with the email address that is on the screen now. And additionally, these are also all aspects that actually the AI Standards Hub could help address too, which my colleagues will explain a bit further in a minute. So hopefully that helps set the scene of kind of the wider work happening around the AI Standards Hub. If you're interested in finding out more about anything that I have just highlighted, we publish all our documents and guidance on the Office for AI website, and we also have a very active Twitter account. So yeah, please give us a follow, and more than happy to take questions. For those of you in the room today, for those of you not in the room, feel free to reach out. And thank you very much. And I will now pass the floor to my colleague, Nikita.
Great, thank you very much, Rose. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nikita, and I'm the Head of Digital Standards Policy in DCMS. I just wanted to start off first by introducing a few people from our team. So we have Ava with us today, who's the Head of Digital Standards and Internet Governance Policy team, and will be available to help with any Q&A later on. We have Freya in the crowd as well, who's a policy advisor in the team, and of course Rebecca, who will be presenting just after me, who's a senior policy advisor in the team as well. So for my part of the presentation, I'm going to give a bigger picture view of a brief overview of the UK government's approach to standards. So as the Minister noted this morning, and as you may have already seen in the National AI Strategy, we have set out the significant role standards can play in supporting our governance approach to AI. The strategy outlines how technical standards have the ability for realizing trustworthy AI, something that we've heard a lot about today, whilst also ensuring global interoperability. We also see standards as being a key tool to promote innovation in the AI sector. As noted in our plan for digital regulation, standards have been recognized to provide a pro-innovative approach to regulating digital technologies. For AI, this approach is key to enable us to remove unnecessary barriers and keep up with that pace of AI developments. We are committed to taking a global approach to shaping standards and working with key international partners to benefit standards for the global community. Domestically, we also recognize the need for taking a multi-stakeholder approach through initiatives such as this AI Standards Hub and through wider coordination with our colleagues at BSI and NPL to ensure standards are developed with a wide range of experts and aligned with shared values. I just wanted to note some of the key strategic and UK priority frameworks which have also helped shape the UK government's approach on AI technical standards. So the G7 framework for collaboration on digital technology technical standards is a key example of this. During our presidency of the G7, we committed to stronger international cooperation with the G7 and other like-minded partners to support the development of digital standards. Within the integrated review domestically and plan for digital regulation, we also noted how standards can complement or provide alternatives to traditional regulation. And most recently, in the National AI Strategy paper and AI Regulation Policy paper, we also committed to exploring the role of standards for implementing that pro-innovation approach to AI regulation in practice. I just wanted to zoom in on the National AI Strategy to pick out a few key deliverables, which hopefully you will all be familiar with as well. So firstly, on AI assurance, we noted the important role standards and assurance mechanisms can play to build trust in the AI systems. In relation to AI regulation, we also committed to exploring the role of standards and assurance mechanisms for governing and regulating our AI approach. And finally, within the National AI Strategy, we also committed to launching the AI Standards Hub, which we can tick off today, and a toolkit which has been implemented through the hub to provide tools to engage more effectively in AI standards. So thank you for listening. That was my very quick overview of UK government. I will now pass over to Rebecca, who will talk about the role of standards in AI governance.
Does this work? Seems locked. Sorry, am I pointing it in the right direction? Okay, great. Well, sorry for the small hiccup. Thank you very much, Nikita, for setting out a very clear picture about how technical standards also are involved in the more general picture of AI governance that we are setting in the UK. I just wanted to also start from a wider angle, just to start setting out what are some of the different layers that characterize AI governance in practice. So this starts from the setting of more general high-level principles for AI governance, so similarly to what we have seen, for instance, in multilateral fora, such as the OECD, UNESCO, and the Global Partnership of AI, and then going down towards the actual implementation of these principles in practice. So again, if we start from the top of this diagram, we can think about principles such as fairness, transparency, and safety, similar to what my colleague Rose just presented, that have been developed internationally to set an international framework for trustworthy AI, recognizing what are some of the key characteristics that needs to be implemented in AI in order for us to trust it. When we talk about standards, however, we tend to move towards the second part of this diagram, so we're more talking about the how to implement these principles in practice. So this can be done in different ways. We're looking at one potential avenue for regulation, which can introduce horizontal rules, focusing on addressing particular characteristics of AI. And this is, again, similar to what my colleague Rose just presented. So, for instance, in the policy paper, we set out cross-sectoral principles tailored to specific characteristics and risks of AI. Secondly, we can also think about specific rules addressing particular applications of AI in different contexts. So if we think about healthcare, for example, and I'm glad to see that our representative from MHRA is here today as well, we can also think about how technical standards and regulation can be used in tandem to address this. As an example, if we think about the application of AI to medical devices, for instance, we will need to signpost like specific requirements, for instance, for product safety before these are deployed in the market. And then, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to change that. And then, finally, international standards are coming into these pictures by providing both a standalone governance tool that can be used by stakeholders to make sure that they're reaching these goals in practice. This can be done at the organizational level, for instance, by setting governance frameworks, addressing issues such as safety and transparency inside an organizations. But they can be also used as tools to complement AI regulation. And this can support our approach to AI regulation by providing stakeholders in the market and across organizations with practical tools to implement these principles in practice. So this slide just sets out some of the work that is currently underway across various standards development organizations. So we're seeing a huge corpus really of like technical standards being developed across different stages of the AI lifecycle. Some of the standards currently in yellow in the slides are still under development. So at the moment, most of these standards are still being developed, but that also means that this is a great opportunity for us to intervene now and start shaping some of these standards. So there are different types of technical standards for AI. They range from setting, for instance, common terminology for specific AI concepts, such as transparency, for instance, that different stakeholders can use to refer to trustworthy AI, and also going down towards assessing, measuring, and managing specific characteristics and risks of AI. If we take one of the standards as an example, we can take the AI risk management standard that was also mentioned earlier today. This standard can really help organizations by setting out, first, the principles informing how different organizations should approach risk management activities and how to implement them when they're using and developing AI systems. This includes, for instance, taking into account principles such as human and cultural factor. So it also helps them to keep in mind what are some of the effects of AI that we're trying to mitigate. And then, secondly, it can also help them set a framework outlining how risk management practices can be integrated into their current activities when they are deploying AI, and also a process for systematically applying these policies and procedures for specific AI activities. This can help them ensure that they have strong governance practices in place and they are able to identify sources of risk and identify correct mitigations to ensure that they are addressed early on in the life cycle of AI. And finally, and not least importantly, we also have interface and networking standards that are essential to ensure that different AI products and systems are developed, are interoperable across borders, and can ensure that we encourage trade and also the operation of AI systems across different countries. So looking at the AI standards landscape and the AI governance picture that we just set out, I think it's clear that we can see how technical standards can be used as practical tools to implement some of the pro-innovation AI governance principles in practice. So starting from some of the more general benefits of technical standards, they can also help us support innovation, growth, and trade, as I just mentioned, by reducing, for instance, technical barriers to trade caused by inconsistent regulations, or also by increasing market access and improving international collaboration. Standard can also bridge gaps between different regulatory jurisdictions, enabling producers to be compliant with both domestic and international standards, for instance, and operate across borders. We can also see how technical standards can be used to implement characteristics such as transparency, accountability, and other characteristics of trustworthy AI in the design and deployment of AI systems. And in that case, how they can be used to support regulation. This is something that we saw, for instance, in the recently, not that recent anymore, but in the published approach from the European Commission in the EU AI Act, where they're referring to technical standards as tools that can be used to achieve a presumption of conformity with the regulatory requirements set in the legislation. Again, there are different ways to refer to technical standards in legislation. The European Commission is going down a more formal way of recognizing them by publishing them in the European Journal, but we can also think about them as less regulatory and more like voluntary tools that we can use to make sure that regulations have a practical implementation. So again, they set out the specific conditions and requirements that different developers can follow to ensure that they're complying with general high-level principles such as trustworthiness and transparency. As an example, I would like to think about a scenario where, for instance, we develop AI systems that are applied in a hiring scenario. So again, due to the possibility that these systems will be biased and they will cause discrimination against specific individuals, we can see how important it is to have technical standards that can establish best practices to detect and treat bias in AI decision-making, as well as uncovering, for instance, potential sources of bias by ensuring that AI systems are transparent and explainable. So adopting these standards really enables organizations to address AI risk in practice while also adapting to regulatory requirements such as transparency and fairness. I just wanted to conclude with a quick overview of how this work fits into the AI Standards Hub that we're launching today and highlighting really the importance of today's launch. So the hub would really help us lay the foundation for an effective AI governance regime. Firstly, by increasing UK stakeholders' engagement in global AI standardization, it will help us ensure that UK values and needs are reflected in how AI technologies are developed and deployed globally. Secondly, by growing the use of international standards in the UK and internationally, it will increase public trust and confidence in AI systems. supporting adherence with fundamental governance principles such as fairness, transparency, safety, and reliability. Having personally worked on the hub, I'm very excited to see the impact that it will have on the UK and globally, and it's on these notes that I would like to pass to my colleague, Florian Ostmann, to take us through the first thematic area that will be covered by the hub, trustworthy AI.
Thank you very much indeed to Nikita, Rose and Rebecca. As we've heard, the next thing is to hear from the Hub's partners on the work going on in this thematic area of trustworthy AI, as well as Florian Ostmann coming back, the head of AI governance and regulatory at the Alan Turing Institute. We're delighted to welcome Tim McGarr, who is able to join us this afternoon. He's responsible for the direction and development of key areas of digital standards, primarily AI and cybersecurity at BSI, and also to welcome Stuart Kitney, Head of Department of Data Science at NPL, where the work includes embedding measurement and traceability into processes using digital and data sciences to deliver confidence in the intelligent and effective use of data. Full trust, full circle, we're right back at trustworthy AI. We will be, I've got the tablet, we will be taking questions on Slido if we've got time. So fingers crossed we will be able to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate, and welcome back everyone for our afternoon session. So this morning we talked about the hub strategy, and we talked about the 4 pillars as part of the hub strategy. Rebecca also just reminded us of those pillars. So that's the observatory, it's connecting and community building, training and knowledge, and research and analysis. So those 4 pillars are one part of the strategy, but there's a second element to the strategy that we will get to now, which is that the hub's work going forward will be structured around thematic areas. And the first thematic area that we have chosen, and again, as with all parts of the strategy, that choice was based on the engagement we did. The first thematic area that we have chosen is the area of trustworthy AI as a horizontal area that thinks about trustworthy AI issues across sectors, across use cases. So that's going to be the starting point. That's going to be the focus of the hub's activities over the next 6 months or so. But the long-term strategy for the hub is to then start thinking about adding vertical thematic areas to that work. So those vertical thematic areas could either be industry verticals, for example, thinking about the use of AI in financial services or in healthcare, for example. It could also be verticals dedicated to particular use cases more narrowly. And so the long-term vision is to have work that considers issues horizontally, complemented by work streams that have a vertical focus. And that, in a sense, very much reflects what we already see in the standardization landscape out there. So if you take a look at the standards database on our website, you will see that there's a whole raft of standards under development, some of them already published, that take a horizontal perspective, but there are also already dedicated standards, for example, for AI in healthcare. So it's very clear that the final picture that we will end up with, in the coming years, in terms of AI standardization, will be a combination of horizontal and vertical standards. But the starting point, and I'll say a bit more about the reasoning behind that, for the hub will be to think about these issues horizontally, to then be in a position to inform thinking about what might be particular considerations that apply to particular verticals. Now, talking a bit more about trustworthy AI as a thematic area, what do we mean by it, and why did we choose this topic? It's worth briefly talking about the definition at a very high level of the topic for the purposes of the hub. I'll keep this very brief because I think most of you in the audience are familiar with debates about trustworthy AI. The main point here really is to say that we take a deliberately broad approach to defining trustworthy AI for the purposes of the hub. So we think of trustworthy AI as the challenge of ensuring that AI systems are ethical, that they work as expected, and that they're used responsibly. And we know that there are challenges in all of those areas. So we know that in the development and use of AI systems. There are challenges and significant ethical issues that can arise. We know that there are challenges around ensuring that systems work as expected, especially as systems become more complex and less explainable, among other things. And we know that there are issues around responsible use and appropriate use, making sure that there is appropriate human oversight, and so on and so forth. So as we approach that topic of trustworthy AI, we're considering all of these various aspects. The other thing to mention is that we are equally going to be thinking about technical as well as non-technical aspects. So we know that AI systems are socio-technical systems in nature. A lot of issues that arise are issues that will have to be addressed at the technical level, but there are also very important issues that are of a non-technical nature, such as thinking again about appropriate human oversight, for example, thinking about communication around AI systems, be it to users or the general public, and so on and so forth. So again, the main point here, we're including both technical and non-technical aspects. And then finally, to say that trustworthy AI, of course, is an umbrella term in many ways for a wide range of specific trustworthiness characteristics, so specific features that AI systems must have in order to be considered trustworthy. And on the slide here, these are, of course, just some examples. These include transparency, fairness, reliability, safety, security or privacy, among several others. And one of the things that came out of the engagement we did was a very strong demand for work that focuses on particular characteristics, specifically drills down into the specifics of how can those characteristics be achieved, rather than having general work around trustworthy AI as a broad concept. And so that's the reason why we have chosen 3 particular topics, and we'll get to those in a moment. We'll take turns presenting those. We've chosen 3 particular topics within the thematic area of trustworthy AI that we will be addressing and looking at and engaging the community around in the coming months. A couple of quick words, having talked about what we mean by trustworthy AI, about why we have chosen this focus. And in particular, why are we choosing to approach this topic from a horizontal perspective rather than thinking about particular verticals at the outset? So one clear, simple reason for this is that challenges of trustworthy AI arise in any context where AI is used, across sectors, across use cases. And therefore, there is a need to be able to connect trustworthiness debates in different areas of AI application, and standards, of course, are one way to achieve and to enable those joined-up conversations. There is also a connection to the work that Rebecca highlighted earlier, the significant work that we've seen over the last few years in terms of developing principles and governance frameworks for AI. So a lot of that work, including at the international level, has focused on specifying principles, general approaches. What is very much needed in the current stage of AI adoption and AI development is to translate those principles into concrete, agreed best practices on how to implement those principles. And standards, again, are one way, of course, one important way to achieve that, to achieve the implementation or operationalization of principles into concrete practices. A third factor is a factor around policy developments and regulatory developments. Rebecca already mentioned the EU AI Act, which will see a range of standards that will be developed to support compliance with the AI Act, and a lot of those standards will be horizontal in nature. So that's one simple reason to, again, start with this focus. And then a final reason is the fact that if we look at the existing landscape of standards that are being developed, there is really a very, very active space of horizontal standards that are already under development across different SDOs. And I'll stop here and hand over to Tim to give us a brief overview of what those horizontal standards that are currently under development look like.
Yeah. Thank you. So, as has been mentioned, the AI Standards Hub covers a series of bodies. I think it's worth sort of reiterating what those are. So it's national standards bodies, including BSI, CEN, CENELEC, ETSI, ISO, IEEE, IEC, and the ITU. And we focus mainly into CEN, CENELEC, ISO, and IEC. So trustworthiness has been a key theme of standardization in AI from very early on. So whether that's the sort of pioneering work we were doing around robotic ethics, or the original work around big data, which Peter mentioned earlier. Thank you, Peter, for that. Also, the great work that IEEE did very early on around ethically aligned design for autonomous systems. So what's on the screen is just a subset of what's available around trustworthiness in AI or in development. And it just reflects what's in ISO IEC, but there's lots of other work that's going on. And as you've already been encouraged to do, I'll go and look at the Standards Observatory and see what's there. And as Florian mentioned, most of it is cross-cutting at the moment, but I'm sure with time there'll be much more of a focus towards particular sectors. So one of the things I want to really sort of pull out, which we're going to mention a lot over the next 6 months, is the management system standard that's coming through. And this is a standard that sits in an organisation and really puts a particular subject at the heart of an organisation. So the standard itself is going to be ISO IEC 42001, and it's going to focus on sort of governance and strategy of the organisation, and really put AI at the core of it. As it happens, it'll be out for public comment very shortly, so that everyone can feed in. And akin to the other standards of its like 9001, which put quality management in the manufacturing sector, or 27001, which put cybersecurity at the heart of the organisation. This is what we really expect the standard to do. And I'll now hand over to Stuart. Thanks. But as I say, I encourage you to look at the observatory and come back to us with comments.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tim. The metrology community has gone on a bit of a journey in the last 5 years. So if anybody in the audience knows the International System of Units, we've very much moved from living in the artifact world. So Sonny mentioned earlier on this morning around a kilogram being a specific artifact that is used to provide a reference point, much more towards what fundamental constants. And so particular redefinition of the kilogram is a fantastic example. And what's come with that is the metrology community has had to sort of reassess what that means for measurement and measurement standards. So Rebecca's just presented where there is measurement standard activity already underway and going on, the specific, the niche, they've got a particular focus. And the metrology community have sort of reflected on this. And MPL's played a leading role in the European community, so part of Euromet, which is the European metrology community, and part of the partnership framework that we work through the MPA scheme. The focus really is very much an understanding of what the requirements for measurement standards are. I don't think any of these topics that you'll see on the screen will come as a surprise. And so recently a strategic research agenda has been set as part of that European community that in effect is a statement of intent as what measurement standards needs to encompass around trustworthy machine learning, trustworthy AI. We do focus as a community on machine learning because it's a data-driven approach. We very much see it as an analytical engine of what AI is. It's not to say that we don't have thoughts and views on neural networks, deep learning, but the reality is we've got a specific approach to take around physics-based models, a principled approach, and making sure that we are data-driven. So the 4 areas that we've highlighted as a community that we really need to be focusing on is uncertainty quantification. I will go into that in a little bit more detail on a follow-on slide on what that means for trustworthy machine learning. Generalizability and robustness of the models, the algorithms and how they're applied. Interpretability, which many people understand and realise that it's a key factor and key point that we need to address. And putting quality frameworks around that. If you're going to measure something, then you've got to know that you've measured the correct thing, that it's got fitness for purpose, and how it's applied. And I think that's a key role that where we see metrology, the NMI community, underpinning what we're trying to do in trustworthy AI, trustworthy machine learning. One addition to that is I think where LMPL can play a key role in the Standards Hub is that international engagement as part of the community, because this is a European-focused approach, and we're very aware of NIST and their AI risk assurance framework approach that they're taking, and there's got to be a collaborative and coordinated approach to what metrology contributes to trustworthiness and trustworthy AI. So I'll hand back to Florian.
Thank you, Stuart. So having gone through this sort of general overview and big picture on trustworthy AI, what we'd like to briefly do now is give you a more concrete preview of the activities that we are planning within this thematic area over the next 6 months. And as I've already mentioned, the plan for the hub is within this thematic area to focus on 3 specific topics within trustworthy AI. Those topics are, firstly, transparency and explainability, secondly, safety, security, and resilience, and thirdly, uncertainty quantification. And each of the partner organizations is going to take a lead on one of these topics. We'll, of course, collaborate closely, but for each topic, we'll sort of bring the specific expertise and strengths that one of our organizations has in this area to inform and shape that work. For each topic, so we'll roll them out in sequence. So the first topic, say over the next 2 months roughly, will be transparency and explainability. That's where the focus of the action will be. That's going to be followed by the second topic, and then later in the spring next year, the third topic. In each area, the activities will take a form of a combination of different formats. All of that facilitated by the online platform. So on the online platform, we'll have content, we'll have blog posts, discussion forums dedicated to each topic. But we'll also have a program of live events. So we'll do webinars to go into more depth, to look at the existing standards landscape within a particular topic. We'll also do workshops and a variety of other formats. So we very much hope that, going back to what we discussed this morning, you'll, of course, join us in being active on the online platform, but also bear in mind that the online platform is just the backbone, and there's an important program of live activity that will be coming in addition to the online platform. And of course, all of that activity will be announced via the event section on the platform. Now, we'll just very quickly give you an overview for each topic and sort of what motivates it. And I'll start with transparency and explainability. So why did we choose this as one of the 3 topics? The concept of transparency and explainability is at the core of many debates around trustworthy AI. For one thing, transparency is an important value in its own right, but it's also clear that in addition to that, transparency plays an important enabling role in achieving other trustworthiness characteristics such as safety or fairness, among others. So it's an important area. There's a lot of theoretical work, a lot of technical work within this area, but it's also a very complex topic, as this graph illustrates. And it's a topic where, as a result of that complexity, we currently often see a lack of agreed terminology in how to describe different aspects of transparency, explainability. We also see a wide range of technical approaches that can be applied to achieving those objectives. And it's an ongoing area of research, but certainly in many cases there's sort of a lack of consensus on what the best approach is to solve the problem at a technical level. On the social side, the socio-technical side, there are important questions around transparency in the sense of communicating information to different types of stakeholders, different audiences, not just technical audience, but also thinking about the information that consumers might need or users that don't have technical expertise. So a lot of questions around that communication aspects. And then finally, transparency explainability can serve a whole range of different purposes, and the right answer to what the best approach to take will depend on the purpose that it's meant to serve. So the bottom line of all of that is it's a lot of complexity in this space, a need for a greater agreement, consolidated view on what how the topic should be described, both terminologically, but then also trying to get to an agreement on what best practices are from a substantive point of view. And so what we'll try within this topic is to make sense of this complexity, look at and particularly think about the role of standards in addressing the complexity. So look at the existing landscape of standards that are already under development within transparency explainability, think about the extent to which they match up with best practices that have been developed elsewhere, to what extent they're designed to address explainability needs, what gaps may exist, and so on and so forth. So those are some of the questions we'll be looking at within this area, and I'll pass over to Tim for the second topic.
So, as was mentioned, we'll be looking at resilience, security, and safety. So, as has been mentioned a few times today, AI really brings in some sort of new challenges. And for all three of these, they are quite established areas of standardization. So in terms of resilience, there's established work around organizational resilience, business continuity, risk management that really helps organizations survive and thrive, especially in all the change that's going on in recent years and still going on. Around security, and specifically cybersecurity, there's about 30 years of standardization that's been helping organizations and economies protect themselves against cyber threats. In terms of safety, particularly around product safety, there's a lot of focus about how you take what were previously static products that now have software inside that may be changing, and how that fits with the particularly the regulatory regime in the UK, the EU, and elsewhere. So, to give you a bit of a flavour of these, I've come up with some of the things that we may be looking through in these particular topics. But the reality is, as Florian mentioned, for all of these, we're doing work and doing research, and it's going to be what is based on the standards that are there, what the community wants, rather than what we think the issues might be. So in terms of resilience, as Rebecca mentioned, there's an AI risk management standard coming very soon. There's also much more that needs to be done to ensure resilience is at the core of organisations around AI. But equally, it's a much more granular level in terms of the models. Can they deal with outlier or unexpected data? Are they resilient to being manipulated, which particularly think about people using them for job interviews or credit scoring is going to be the case? And can they be accurate over time as the data comes through? Around security, looking particularly at cybersecurity. So the market for cybercrime is about $6 trillion a year and growing about 15% a year. And cyber criminals are extremely innovative and are using AI now. So the other side is how can we better use AI to protect organisations? And as AI grows more and more and becomes the key intellectual property of organisations, how can that be better protected? Around safety, as I mentioned, the sort of changes around products and how that fits with AI, but equally bringing AI into existing sectors. How does that then affect how risk is dealt with, how liability is dealt with, and some of those may or may not be subjects of standardisation. So in terms of how we're planning to tackle this, we obviously will be talking and bringing in ideas, but over the next few months, a lot of it will be behind the scenes, sort of really examining these topics. And if any of you have practical experience of implementing AI and see the challenges around security, safety, and resilience, we really want to talk to you and get that expertise brought in. And we'll bring that all back together with a workshop in January and then present the results back in February and talking a lot about it from then on inwards. I'll now hand over to Stuart.
So MPL will focus on uncertainty quantification and what that means for metrology, particularly focused around machine learning. We'll take a similar approach where it'll be webinars, education and communication through training, but we're very keen to encourage people to engage through the research and development platform within the hub, because we're actively seeking engagement and feedback on the approach that we're proposing or working as part of the European metrology community on our approach to what looks like an uncertainty quantification or is an uncertainty quantification framework for machine learning. And what do we mean by uncertainty? It's got many different meanings to different people, but in metrology perspective, there's two forms, so the random effects, and then the uncertainty about the parameters of the model. And if you try to address these singularly, there's ways to do that, but in complex systems like machine learning, there are trade-offs and issues or challenges to address these to in effect get a full and understanding and comprehensive idea of how uncertainty propagates through a system. So this is the approach that we're proposing, this pyramid model in terms where we try to look at and address model biases. We have generalizability as much as possible and applicable. We try to understand random effects, account for insufficient data, poor data quality, and have quality frameworks around data itself, understanding how that then propagates through a system, and taking a principled and scalable approach, principled in effect from a data-driven approach, because we work in measurement standards, physics-based organisation that work with data and from a measurement perspective. And if I could put it into context a little bit and bring it to life in relation to some of the conversation that's taken place this morning, we talk about assured autonomy. And then from a metrology perspective, a measurement standards perspective, we look at this and say, well, what's the role for an NMI, MPL? Where do we fit? And if you think about it, an assured autonomous vehicle, in effect, is a suite of sensors. So it's a sensor network. It's a complex system. So if you go back to a very basic approach of the LiDAR, radar, or camera that's on that autonomous system, it becomes a very, very complex system very quickly when you put multiple suites of measurement modalities into the system. So in effect, MPL and the metrology community have had to adapt very quickly to understand what that complex system is and how we understand the uncertainty that can propagate through that. Different measurement modalities, characterized, analyzed in different ways, come together, and then you apply machine learning and algorithms to it. There's where your uncertainty propagates, and that's where understanding the measurement from the very beginning and how that propagates in is a key factor and a key role that we're looking to play. So keen for people to engage, interact, feedback through the R&D community on the hub, but particularly engage through training as well. So thank you.
And thank you very much. Now, we are running a little bit behind the schedule according to the printed programme. However, we feel it's really important to have this Q&A session here. It might mean we have to squeeze things a little bit later on. But could I now invite two more people to the stage? Careful with that chair. It looks like it's about to fall off the edge, Florian. It's giving me the heebie-jeebies. Thank you. Could I also invite back Rose Woolhouse from the Office for AI, and also somebody who was mentioned but not on stage, Ava Ignatchenko, I'm going to have problems with this, Ignatchenko, yes, who is head of digital standards and internet governance at DCMS. If the two of you would like to come and take a seat. What I would say about these microphones, I think it's sort of here, isn't it? So as opposed to here, which can get a little bit poppy. Yeah, oh, the guy at the back's going, yes, yeah, okay. So, taking from, oh, I've just gone poppy there. Whoa, don't get overexcited. I've got a couple of questions that seem to be linked here. I don't know who's going to want to start on this. One is saying, NPL are leading the measurement side of AI, but how would you measure the trustworthiness of AI in terms of outcomes? And then we've got another one saying the danger of assuming we know what people would find trustworthy. There's a danger in that. Do we have good social science evidence on what people would actually trust, i.e. outcomes? Oh, Tim's nodding. You're going to start? Oh, no. Oh, go on.
So I was going to tackle the second question and just say, in terms of it's a good question, very good question. In terms of the standards process, what we try and do is bring in, as we mentioned, the various different stakeholders. So you have the consumer perspective. So does the consumer groups find this trustworthy? You have the academic perspective.
Thank you. Yep.
So the kinds of things you're saying about what's the research saying, having that fed in as well. So making sure it's not just business, government, it's the whole set of stakeholders that should be building it in.
Okay, thank you. And Stuart, did you want to add something?
Absolutely. Just on the metrology perspective or measurement, that's why we're very keen to make sure it's focused particularly around trustworthiness in machine learning. It's a very big topic and big challenge, so we approach it from the measurement perspective to be able to try to validate and verify the outputs or the outcomes of the measurement modality. I think there's a whole ethics, legal, assurance question that is not our role or remit, but can be addressed by everybody in this room and the community that will contribute to the hub.
Thank you. I should have said we're going to keep answers quite short here. Don't feel you have to mention if it's not your area, but if anybody else wants to add on this. Florian, yes?
Just very briefly on the second question around trust and trustworthiness, I think it's worth emphasizing and highlighting that we've defined the topic as trustworthiness rather than trust. Recognizing that trustworthiness is the foundational characteristics. So what we want to achieve is trust for the right reasons, trust for justified reasons. And what's needed for that is trustworthiness. That's the focus, rather than thinking about how do we get people to trust the system without thinking about the underlying properties.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much. Making a clear difference there with trustworthiness. Okay. Anything? No, they're not looking enthusiastic here. Right, I've got two questions that, if I can just find them. One was saying, okay, yes, does the Standards Hub currently include an exhaustive list of all AI standards? But then somebody else was saying, wouldn't it be helpful? Yeah, there are so many different standards on similar topics, it might be confusing. So will the hub aim to support only a few standards setting bodies only, especially ISO and IEC? So it's like two opposite sides of the coin there. Where do we sit?
So the current scope is focused on a specific, well, I'd say the focus, it's not an exclusive focus, but the focus is on a handful of SDOs. So that includes ISO IEC at the international level, ITU at the international level. At the European level, it includes ETSI, and going forward as work emerges, we'll also aim to include CEN and CENELEC. And then on top of that, of course, any national standards that BSI develop or relevant work from NPL. That's the initial scope, because we had to define a focus to start with. We're of course aware that there's a lot of important work happening elsewhere. And so part of the strategy going forward is to think about how to evolve the database.
And presumably, if everybody gets involved and puts their comments in, that will help how things evolve. Yes, thank you. Ava.
Thank you. I think it's a really important point that we don't lose sight of what we're trying to achieve with an AI Standards Hub. It's not about having a comprehensive list of all the standards that are out there, and I think that would be really incomprehensible and a really, really difficult picture if we're thinking about the future of having kind of the presentation we had earlier in terms of how the hub works. If we then see a list of hundreds and hundreds of standards, it's really hard to see through that, to know where to start, which is why the way the hub is presented and the way it's set up is really to help users get onto that journey and really prioritize where they should be focusing first. And that's really one of our objectives as government with this hub, that we make sure it's actually helpful and it helps you understand the whole landscape rather than seeing the entire landscape, if that makes sense.
Thank you, thank you. Right, moving on to another question here. Well, it's a very simple one. It might be a yes or no answer. Were civil society stakeholders involved in the process of defining trustworthy AI?
So yes, they were very much involved in our broader engagement exercise. So civil society was just as prominent a group as all the other groups that we spoke about this morning. I will, of course, say that the definition I put on the slide, I refer to it as a definition. It's, of course, not a set in stone definition. It's not a dictionary definition. It's meant to convey the sense of the breadth and the diverse issues that we think are within scope for our work. By all means, that's part of the community approach we want to take. If you think that there's something wrong with the definition that we just presented, we have a dedicated forum for trustworthy AI on the website. It'd be great to hear any thoughts on what you think might be missing.
Anybody want to? It's interesting we talk about civil society, but that covers. It's almost like and everyone else, really, isn't it? So I suppose what's an interesting point here is if people feel that they want to be involved and they're not quite sure where their organisation sits or the people that they're representing sits, how would they get involved? What is the way to, two microphones moving. I love this. Having the microphone moving gives me, they don't have to wave or wink. They just lift the mic. So Florian's in there first.
Various ways. Obviously, everyone is welcome on the website. Contribute to the forums, join discussions that are happening there, introduce yourselves to other community members. There will be ways to get in touch with us directly. We'll have an email address. There'll be a contact form on the website. If you're unsure sort of where you fit in the taxonomy of stakeholder groups, feel free to reach out and we'll try to advise. But really where you fit in is much less important than getting involved. And so please don't worry about that categorization too much.
I've just had somebody wave the stop sign, but there's one that's really important. I'm just going to take this one, sorry. MC's prerogative. There are various words we've been hearing. We've been hearing regulation, we've been hearing standards, we've been hearing non-statutory, we've been hearing guidance. This question just says, is a non-statutory approach appropriate for ensuring accountability in AI? Maybe it's not fair, that's the one you can't answer quickly, but I just sense a feeling of unbalance between the words being used, of saying, let's be light touch, let's just give guidance, and at the other end we're saying, hey, we want to make sure this all works properly. Anybody, any lifting of the microphones here? Maybe they don't want to answer. Go on then, Stuart.
Just going to give my perspective is surely the hub should be the forum and the community to engage in that type of conversation, because very complex, very challenging to address, but the people in the room, the people online, the people that are going to engage with the hub should be asking those questions, and we should be attempting to answer them, I think.
Yeah. Rose, I'll let you get your word in.
Thank you. Just to say that that's definitely a strong theme that's coming through the stakeholder feedback that we've got so far on the AI regulation policy paper, and it's something that's under review. And yeah, we definitely agree with that using the hub and kind of other ways to have that conversation is also really important. But we're also very aware that, things are changing, the landscape is changing, the technology is changing, and sometimes that statutory side takes a bit longer. So it is quite important to look at across the different mechanisms, whether that be standards or, assurance or others.
I think those are wonderful answers, and actually you've thrown it back out to say, please engage. And I think I might be getting a sign now which says you should have stopped 2 minutes ago. So I'm going to say thank you very much indeed to our panel for those quick fire questions and answers. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And as they leave their seats, we welcome our final panel, talking about developing standards for trustworthy AI. And here we've got various different stakeholder groups reflecting the Hub's emphasis on a multi-stakeholder approach to standardization. Florian's going to be hosting the panel. The guy over there is the one waving, saying when we have to stop, okay? Sue Daley, I've taken some of your time, I'm really sorry. Sue Daley is the Director of Technology and Innovation at techUK. Sue's role includes work programs on cloud, data protection, data analytics, AI, data ethics, digital identity and Internet of Things as well. As well as, it was your walk-up, it's instead of walk-up music, as well as emerging and transformative technologies and innovation policy. She can answer questions on anything. Cecilia Nunn is a responsible AI manager at Digital Catapult. As part of her role, she works with businesses and startups to put ethics into practice and teach tech teams how to implement it into their products. Is it Johan or Johan? Johan Ordish from the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, where he leads the software group within the Innovative Devices Division. His group are responsible for most aspects of regulating software as a medical device in the UK, including AI-based software tools. And the final panelist is Sam Cannicott, the Deputy Director of Projects at the Centre of Data Ethics and Innovation. And in this role, he leads the Centre's collaborative work with other organisations, supporting them to develop and deploy data-driven technology responsibly. Florian, over to you.
Right, thank you.
Oh, you'll be needing this, won't you?
Yeah, later on, yes.
I'll leave that for you. Yep.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome to our cozy stage, Sue, Cecilia, Sam, and Johan. I hope no one's going to fall off.
Now I'm slightly worried.
Thank you so much for agreeing to join us this afternoon. I'm delighted that you are here. The motivation behind this panel is very much going back, similarly to the panel we had this morning, to emphasize the multi-stakeholder nature of standards development and the importance of including a wide range of perspectives. And I'm excited, very excited, to hear what you'll have to say from your respective angles. So Sue, obviously, from the perspective of techUK as a major industry body that includes a lot of established companies in the space. Cecilia, through your work in Digital Catapult, especially your experience with startups and the angle that they might be coming from. Johan, as a key regulator in one of the verticals where AI is particularly high in terms of adoption, and also as a regulator that has quite a long track record in engaging with standardization more generally. And we know that that differs between regulatory bodies. So it'd be very interesting to hear from your perspective, given the MHRA's historical engagement with standardization. And then Sam, obviously your perspective against the background of CDI's work on trustworthy AI in general, and in particular the AI assurance roadmap that was published earlier this year or last year, and the consideration for the role of standards in the broader assurance landscape. So thank you very much. And perhaps we can start with a general first round, simple question, an invitation for each of you to simply tell us a bit more about your work, including what your organization does for those of you who may not be familiar, and what role does trustworthy AI play in the context of your work as a topic. We'll get to standardization later, so maybe let's just start with the topic of what does trustworthy AI mean in the context of your work, and why is it important? Let's start with you, Sue.
Okay. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here today and really support the launch of the AI Standards Hub, so thank you for the invitation. So I'm Sue Daley at techUK. We are the trade association for the UK tech sector as a whole. I see quite a lot of familiar faces in the room, so hello. It's like when you're at school, you shouldn't wave at people from the stage, but hello. So yeah, hi. So we have around 900 plus member companies that make up the kind of techUK family, and some of them are in the room. So hello. If you're not, why not? But that's another panel. And that ranges from, as you said, the large kind of global international players, all the way down to growing SMEs, as well as digital startups and scale-ups and entrepreneurs as well. So a real kind of overview of the digital tech ecosystem in the UK, and we've been going for many, many years. And of course, we see, and we've worked on AI for many, many years, coming out of our work on big data, as we used to call it. We talked about that a bit this morning, data analytics and machine learning. And within part of our AI work has been that kind of how do we get AI developed and deployed and used in an ethical and responsible way. So digital ethics has been core to our work for many years now. It's a priority because of that, and we were just talking about it before, trustworthiness. How do we get that right leads to trust, and leads to trust and confidence. And trust and confidence, as we all know, is key for more adoption, more usage, as well as more development of AI tools and technologies. That trust and confidence is important, therefore trustworthiness is important, not just for getting greater adoption and use across all the economy and society, but also in particularly as we're talking about now, making sure that investment in AI technologies isn't wasted, that we get the development, we get the responsible innovation kind of by design, so that when it comes to the market, it can be adopted and used. And that helps to drive the market and drive the ecosystem that the Minister was talking about this morning, that we have a thriving ecosystem in the UK. So we look at issues around what does trustworthy mean? What's trustworthiness? How do you make it meaningful, and where is it meaningful for people within the AI supply chain, but also help organizations learn from each other? So providing that platform to share, and perhaps we can come on to this a bit, best practice and examples of where people are getting this right now, where people are not getting this right, and where they need to learn from others. So we really provide that community to explore, what are some of the common questions that we come back to, transparency, explainability, how do we deal with issues around IP as well? All those, we talked, your presentations just before showed how much is in trustworthiness itself, right? Just as that topic. So what we try to do is provide that platform to enable that conversation to happen with our members, but of course with partners like Turing and BSI and others, which is really important. We can't do this alone, so everybody has to come together.
Great, thank you very much. I have lots of follow-up questions in my head, but I'll save them for later.
Oh,
and maybe we can move on to you, Cecilia, to hear a bit about your perspective. Also, a perspective that's close to developers, but a different different types of companies,
Yes,
largely.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I am from Digital Catapult. So we were set up as one of the catapults by the government, so a not-for-profit. And our kind of tagline is helping the UK accelerate the adoption of new technologies. So we work in AI and ML, we work in quantum, we work in IoT, so loads of acronyms, we work in 5G, we work in VR and AR. And yeah, so we are basically working with academics, we're working with startups, we're working with businesses, we're also working with investors. And that's a really kind of interesting ecosystem because we run a lot of accelerators on lots of different kind of programs and different technology areas. And something that we're really focusing on at the moment is with regards to trustworthy AI, when we're talking to startups about this, yes, I suppose in this kind of area, you can get into a kind of echo chamber. We all think it's a great idea, we all agree with it, but actually when you get to startups and businesses, they don't really think the same way. And you really need to change the narrative of how you're speaking about ethics and how you're speaking about responsible innovation. You have to change it and say, this is an amazing innovation opportunity. And also we need to be talking to investors to encourage them to hold the startups and the businesses accountable. Because many of the startups come to us and say, yeah, but my investors don't care. And we go, right, okay then. So we can kind of promote trustworthy AI as much as we want, but actually it's an education system for investors and for startups, because also what does trustworthy AI look on such a small scale as a startup? Lots of startups come to us and say, but I'm an ethical person, therefore my products are ethical. And we go, not really how it works, unfortunately. So it's a huge education. That's what we're working on. So it's kind of up the food chain to investors and also to startups and also businesses, but also how can we get the academic institutions who are working on this on kind of real life projects. So yeah, kind of correlating all of that.
Right, thank you. And thanks for bringing in the investor perspective, because I think that's a perspective that we haven't talked too much about today, but clearly investors are one integral part of the ecosystem of stakeholders involved. So definitely an area for the hub to think about how to engage with investors as part of our work. Johan, medical device software as a medical device regulation and trustworthy AI. Tell us more.
First of all, sorry for sitting in the wrong order. That's completely probably messed with your brain, Florian. So sorry.
I'm just ignoring it.
MHRA. What do? You probably know us as the vaccine regulator, but we're so much more. We regulate much weirder things than vaccines. One of those slightly stranger things is software as a medical device. So that's software with a medical purpose. I'm not going to bother to give you the definition because it would probably slowly lull you to sleep. But anyway, that aside, AI with a medical purpose is software as a medical device, and we regulate it, so it has to meet certain standards to get to market. And the whole idea behind that is that it assures that product works, it does what it says it does, and that patients are assured that they're safe and that it works. I think I just said that twice. Never mind. Really, trustworthy AI, what does it mean to us? Well, it means something quite simple, right? So the device, the AI model does what it said it does and is effective, and it meets its intended purpose. So I think Chris Whitty said it best through the pandemic. No test is better than a test that doesn't work. So AI has massive, huge potential to get patients to the right pathway, right patient, right pathway, right time. But on the other side, it also has the risk to get the wrong patient to the wrong pathway at the wrong time. There's always the counterbalance of risk, and that is what it is to work at MHRA, and that is what it is to work in AI as a medical device, is to see the massive benefits and try to realize that, while at the same time is mitigating all of those risks. So we only capture a part of trustworthy AI. We have aspects of fairness within our reach, but we are a patient safety regulator, and an AI as a medical device has a massive benefit for patient safety, but there are risks to be minimized. So I'm sure we can talk about those and the role of standards going forward. So.
Great, thank you. And I think that's a good segue, Sam. In your context, a fair amount of thinking on risks, how to address them, including assurance. Over to you.
Yeah, so firstly, the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation is part of DCMS, so we sit in the digital department, but we're not a policy body, we're more sort of operational and applied, and what we try and do is sort of drive responsible innovation or trustworthy innovation, and we work with others, either within government or outside, who are trying to use data and data-driven technologies like AI. We work with them to make sure, or help them do so in a way that is responsible and trustworthy, and a lot of that comes down to thinking about the governance of what they're developing. How are they identifying and then addressing some of the ethical questions that arise? And we found that trustworthiness is really important. I'm not actually sure trustworthiness is a word, but people keep saying it again and again. And I always cross it out of people's work, and I'm using it myself, so I'm a hypocrite. But being trustworthy is important because if you're not operating in a trustworthy environment, either you're potentially deploying a tool that won't do what it says it does, or it just doesn't work. But more importantly, trustworthiness is also about understanding public attitudes and what the public think is acceptable, because the technology might work effectively, but if you're out of step with what is acceptable to citizens, then you're probably in the wrong place. And what we know that when there's this uncertainty about what it means to be trustworthy, either that stifles innovation because organizations don't have the confidence to develop or deploy technologies that could be really beneficial, or when things do go wrong and you're operating in an environment that isn't trustworthy, it triggers a public backlash, and then you sort of the public lose confidence, and then you sort of, that stifles innovation as well. So we work with teams to address that, and as Florian said, a big part of our work is AI assurance, because what we have found is that there's, going back to that lack of confidence, often organizations, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector, they don't have the confidence to deploy technologies because they don't actually know it will do what it says it does. So we're trying to think about, what does an assurance ecosystem look like? Well, how can we build on some of the good practice that's already out there in industry and public sector to build this sort of assurance system, taking lessons from cybersecurity assurance, financial audit, and thinking about what can we do sitting in government to help develop this ecosystem. So we're not working on a sort of a top-down policy paper or anything like that. It's more about sort of what can we do in a convening role to work with organizations like the Standards Hub that we've been working with closely, and also techUK and other industry bodies to understand what is needed out there to help build this assurance system. Maybe we can talk a bit more about that.
Great, and speaking about collaboration between the AI Standards Hub and CDI, one thing that we haven't mentioned today yet is, of course, that one of the e-learning modules that we have on our platform that launched today is a module on AI assurance that's based on CDI's work, which we're very delighted to have been able to produce, and look forward to continuing that collaboration. Great, so I think with the assurance discussion, we've already entered now the standardization territory. So let's do another round, moving on from the topic of trustworthy AI, specifically thinking about the role of standards in achieving trustworthy AI. It'd be really interesting to get each of your takes on that. What role do you see for standards? What's the importance of standards in achieving trustworthy AI? And perhaps, in particular, also thinking about the role of international standards, which are, as we've said many times today, the focus of the Standards Hub. What's the importance of the international angle in this? Let's maybe do the same order, if you would like to come in.
So standards play obviously a really key role, or else we wouldn't be here. But for industry and for organizations, I think in two ways standards play a key role. One, and we're going to increasingly perhaps see this around compliance. So how can you, and actually they're linked. So compliance, then being able to demonstrate that you are doing what you say you're going to do. So standards provide that kind of standardization. It's a standard approach that can demonstrate that I am doing what I am being required to do, or I'm doing what perhaps the market is looking for me to do, or I'm doing, and my tool or my technology is adhering to a standard, and that is required under law and regulation. And obviously we're seeing that as an increasing drive for the EU AI Act, and we have yet to see what the UK will do. But standards, therefore, enables organizations to have that clarity and that certainty that they can demonstrate through a standard that they are meeting the requirements that are needed. So I think it does provide that certainty and that clarity. For all organizations, and we may come on to this, large and small, right? So something we need to think about is how we get standards and standardization right for all sizes of business, and how we get that balance right, and perhaps how the hub could help with that and help particularly smaller organizations, those growing AI companies to thrive, as well as the larger, you say, international companies. And the international piece is really important, because something that's really important, of course, to our members and who do work internationally, or those that are looking to work internationally, is that it is, I suppose, certainty around what is required in the UK versus what is required in the EU versus what is required in other markets, and that coherence across the world. And I think, obviously, if you're looking to grow in other markets and other industries, being able to join up and being able to understand the linkages and where there is certainty that the standards, you can comply with one standard and then you can operate in different markets is really, really key. I'll pause there, but I think it's a fast-moving area, though, right? It's constantly evolving, so it's something I think the AI Standards Hub could really help with.
Great, thank you, Cecilia. There's probably a lot of shared points between Suze and your perspective. But what are some of the things you would highlight specifically in the context of your work?
So I would say that standards are great, especially for the startups who don't have the kind of legal department. So they don't have that kind of support within the organisation. So standards are great because it's that kind of launching pad where small organisations can start and they've got some kind of place to kind of launch off. I think the kind of other side of the coin with standards, which I think is great about the Standards Hub launch, is the usability of standards. Because we have so many standards, so startups come to us and say, we have no idea where to start. We don't know what applies to us. We're not really sure which application we should focus on. So I think one big thing that when we're talking about this is usability, so search functionality. We need to make sure that people can actually search for the different standards and can make sure that they find them, that they're accessible, that they don't have to be password locked or you have to be paying for the standards. If we want the startups and the business community to be adopting these, maybe we shouldn't necessarily be making them pay to actually access them if we want them to be building trustworthy AI. So I would say that great, but try and make them as easy as possible for people to access, understand, and actually kind of utilize and practically apply them in their organizations. Because that's another thing. The engineering teams come to us and they get these documents and say, we agree with everything, but what does this mean in our sprints? What does this mean in our kind of backlogs when we're creating the different algorithms we're working in? What does that practically mean in the kind of machine learning data that we're using? So I think it's that kind of side step of education as well. It's not just, here's a standard, go and sort it out yourself. It's the education of the role standards have in your organization, how you can use them, and how you can actually implement them.
And also where the standards apply depending on where you are in that AI life cycle, right? So different people will have different responsibilities and different requirements. So it's understanding where you fit in that life cycle as well.
And maybe just to quickly jump in here, to say that with the learning that we've developed so far, that's of course an initial step. And one thing we're really keen to hear from community members is around specific, training needs for particular groups. If you're out there, if you're looking at the website, look at the materials, and think there's something, particular angles that are missing, specifically, perhaps, areas of skills or simply information about the landscape that other stakeholders may well be familiar with, but your group may have less experience with, please, that's one of the inputs that we're really keen to get. Please share that with us. Johan, over to you.
So I guess let me start with what, in my view, is the biggest misconception about standards, is that standards equal homogeneity, right? Where actually I think it's quite the opposite. Standards actually allow you to represent the kind of beautiful heterogeneity which is out there, and that's why MHRA and medical device regulation, which is kind of the OG standard users for presumptive conformity, that's why, that approach was taken. So, for instance, try to put yourself in kind of my shoes. You're trying to design AI as a medical device legislation, right? There's kind of two vices and a virtue between those two vices. On one side, there are 2 million medical products, medical devices alone registered with MHRA. That's everything from contact lenses to multi-layer AI, right? And your regulation has to be fit for purpose for all of them. So you could write that legislation, minute detail about every single one of those products, but that is completely and utterly impossible. And I can tell you because I thought about doing that and gave up after about 5 minutes. But on the other side, right, you could write such high-level legislation that manufacturers wouldn't have a hope in hell of all coming to the same conclusion and all having a product that was produced that was of quality, right? The way to square that difference, the way to get the virtue between vices, is to write high-level legislation that includes essential requirements and have standards which give manufacturers the tools to demonstrate conformity. And I can tell you that works because MHRA have been in this business for a long time. I'm a relatively newcomer to MHRA, only being in post for 2 years. But it has worked and it continues to work. There are things we can improve, but I think that's the way forward for the medical device side, right? So it gives people the certainty that they need to reach conformity, but also it represents that heterogeneity, because there are weird standards out there. You know, there are strange niche standards that people spend their lives working on. You know, for instance, how you design a CPAP machine. You wouldn't think that's important until you come to the pandemic. You need to produce, you know, millions of them at the click of the fingers. So, you know, people get to spend their life's work and get that certainty. You can represent heterogeneity and do the best for patients and public. So that's why I think it's important. And why is the Standards Hub important? So primarily what we hear, and we hear that through the Multi-Agency Advisory Service, 2 reps, Clee and Alison being over there, if you don't mind waving, so people can ask you awkward questions. What we heard from market in the healthcare sector is that manufacturers want to know 2 things. What do I need to do and when? So the Standards Hub helps in a cross-sector horizontal way identifying what is the state of the art and will help manufacturers identify what they need to do when. MAS helps the regulatory side, identifying the regulation, but there is a need, an absolute need for that cross-sector approach, which hopefully, fingers crossed, because MHRA are all on this, it works.
Great, thank you very much for that. I'll take a quick break here to say that I've managed to unlock the iPad. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, please share them via Slido, and I'll try to work them into the discussion. But Sam, over to you.
Yeah, I agree with much of what's just been said, particularly the point around standards enabling flexibility, which is why I think they've got such an important role to play in this space where we're dealing with sort of emerging technology. I guess a slightly different angle is why I think standards are important is that working in a sort of data ethics or AI ethics space for quite a long time, there's sort of been quite circular conversations around ethical principles, and lots of organizations, international bodies have established a set of principles which generally more or less say the same thing. And the real challenge is how you practically apply those. And I think standards is one way of getting into that, of really thinking, how do you turn something like, you know, if you've got a principle around transparency, what does that look like in practice? And I think there's a really exciting opportunity here to sort of really work on that, as Florian set out in the presentation. I think at the CDI, just one thing to highlight is we produced, working with the Cabinet Office, a public sector algorithmic transparency standard, which was published last year and is currently being piloted. And I think that's a really good example of taking a principle that when we've done focus groups and spoken to the public and civil society, nearly everyone says transparency is really important. But how you get from that to really thinking about what does that look like in practice is really hard. So what we've done is develop this standard that is iterative. We want to continue improving it, but helps public sector organizations that are using algorithmic tools to do so in a way that is transparent, and they can also do that in a consistent way. So there's sort of more certainty around what does transparency look like in this space.
Can I just come back? Sam's absolutely right, and I just think it touches on the really tricky question that you asked the panel before in terms of, is it statutory, is it non-statutory, is it this, is it that? I think, and I hope Sam might agree with me, although I'm looking at him now. Standards are one tool that you can use to operationalize AI ethics or AI trustworthiness or AI trust or AI transparency. It's not the only tool, right? So there are different tools and some of them could be regulatory, some of them could be statutory, some of them could be non-statutory. Impact assessments was mentioned before, and other tools and technologies that you could use to demonstrate that, right? So it's part of that toolkit, I suppose, that you can use. But I think to answer the really tricky question before, it's not one or t'other. It's a collection of different tools and technologies, of which standards is a key one. But we may find others develop as well through, you know, the collaboration through the hub perhaps, and it's how do you then bring them all together and show how you can operationalize this and how you can get this right. I agree.
Absolutely, and I think, as we mentioned during the last presentation already, you know, that broader question around what's the relationship between standards and other governance tools is part of the set of questions, you know, that the AI Standards Hub will try to shed light on. Also acknowledging that the answer may well depend on the sector and the context. You know, there may be a different answer in the medical device sector compared to other sectors. There are a couple of questions from Slido that I'd like to weave in, and perhaps we can combine them with a broader question, especially for those of you who are familiar with standardization in other contexts. So I don't know, perhaps Sue and Johan. Be interesting to hear what you think can be learned from standardization in other areas, you know, medical device, software as a medical device that doesn't involve AI, or the other tech areas, both in terms of positive, but maybe also sort of, you know, negative things that we've seen didn't work that well in standardization in other areas. What can we learn to make it work, get it right for AI? And in particular, to weave in these questions, there were 2 comments online. One around, will standards for AI be, will perfection be the enemy of the good in terms of, where...
That sounds like an exam. You have 3 hours.
Right. You'll have 3 minutes. And then a similar question around, in terms of maybe what we can learn from other areas, international landscape of regulation. Regulations may well vary across jurisdictions. Where do standards fit in?
So brave of me to go first and to take the hard one. Maybe to briefly, some lessons. So I would say hierarchy is important. So having a core set of standards which you build off, which makes sense to characterize the risks and benefits. So I think there is something very, very deep and common across AI and across sectors, regardless of technology, which is we're obsessed with risks and benefits, right? So having that core set of standards and building off that and making sure the international landscape is all heading in the right direction. Standards committees are a kind of a dark art to me, and I think hopefully BSI, you're absolutely fantastic, and it's a credit to the UK that we have, the strength of BSI with us here as well. That is a massive boon to us because it is a dark art, and I try not to get involved if I can possibly avoid it, apart from being in committees, of course. So I think making sure that the international direction is building in the right side, but also it's connected as well. So if regulators such as myself and on the international sphere are heading in a different direction, if the standards are not fit for purpose, if we don't see them being beneficial for presumptive conformity or useful in that way, then there is going to be impaired. So I think it's join up is the most important part of this, right? And that's, again, speaking to the benefit of this particular hub, because it is join up. It's more join up, more visibility. So I think that's the important question. Did I answer the hard one? I can't even remember what the hard one was now.
I'll try and give it a go as well. I obviously agree with the BSI points as well. Definitely a real jewel in our crown, as it were. So really, really important work that the BSI does. I've been involved in quite a bit of standards in the past. I'm just trying to reflect. So the one that I think was mentioned, Tim, you may have mentioned cybersecurity. So obviously look at the UK's leadership in BS 7799, going back to 27001 now it is. Thank you very much. Look at me. ISO. I think so one, that meta need. So what is the need? What is the need that the market needed to drive greater cybersecurity take up and use? So understanding what the market needs, and it's going to be the same in healthcare as the same in other markets and industries. And then linking that with how you can help businesses understand what that means to their customers. So it's like people, process, and technology. So you get your people right, for cyber, you get your processes right, such as, helping standards that can help you to do that. And then the technologies that support the standards development. So it's joining it up and getting that narrative right, I think, is important. And then it's scaling it up, it's scale up. So I think 7799 took off because it scaled up quite quickly, and then it became an international standard. Where it doesn't work so much is if you have that disconnect, and perhaps this comes back to that connectivity that the hub can provide. So we've seen some of that in some of the attempts around cloud standards in the past, of just that disconnect with where the market is, where the requirement is, where others are. And it's about, therefore, bringing everyone together on the same page and going, okay, what are we trying to do here? What do we need? What's going to be helpful to the market? And therefore, what's going to be able to be easily to be scaled up and adopted and used, and what's going to help? And I think that comes back to AI. We need to think really carefully. And it was a question around earlier today about how do we make sure we don't stifle innovation and stifle the market? How do we get this right as well in a way that standards, and I'm not suggesting it will, but standards don't become a barrier to entry into the market, or even a barrier to, well, I just can't adopt these tools and technologies because I'm then going to have to conform to all these standards, and what does that mean? And then people back away. So it's balance. So it's getting that connectivity and connection and convergence of everybody, and it's that balance, I think, is key. And I suppose then that comes to, don't look for perfection, look for what, see, I'm trying to answer the tricky one. Look for what's the need, what's so is it certifying AI standards for everything, or is it looking at high-risk applications, for example, or something like that? So getting that balance right, I think.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And the point about the need, certainly one will take to heart. we all know that a standard being developed is no guarantee for the standard, actually being used.
Absolutely, and it's a lot of time, it's a lot of resource, it's a lot of effort to do it. So.
And in a sense, I know I've mentioned it many times today, but I think the need point is again a point where, that illustrates the importance of diversity of voices, because different stakeholders may have different conceptions of what the needs are, and it's important to come to a coherent and joined up view on those. I saw you raise your microphone, Cecilia. Would you like to come in?
So it's just, so recently we've been thinking, so we work with lots of tech teams that work with MVPs, so minimum viable product. So what we're trying to do with startups is a kind of MVE, so minimum viable ethics. So what's the kind of first step that they can start doing in their organizations that they can then iterate, expand, so that kind of stepping stone that they can then kind of leap off to make it kind of more accessible. Yeah.
Great. Sam, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think just to say, actually, I think there's an opportunity through the hub, given that you are bringing these different communities together from industry to academia to civil society. And as the team said in their presentation earlier, in government, we've published the policy paper earlier in the summer that sets out these cross-sectoral principles. I think there's a real opportunity there for, through the hub, to work with regulators as well as the sort of wider society to think about what do the standards look like in this space that could support putting those sort of those principles into practice.
Great, thank you. I think we've reached the end point on the original agenda, so it's 3:45. I've been told that some of you may have other commitments. Are we okay to run one last round?
I think that might be me, but I've warned my colleagues I won't be on my team call,
okay.
So yes, go
Great.
for it. If they're watching, I'm really sorry. I'm really busy right now. Yeah, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, maybe just a final brief round. This has all been really, really insightful and interesting. But maybe to wrap it up, what are some of the things you're most excited about in terms of what the hub will be doing, and maybe some suggestions where the kinds of priorities that you think the hub should pursue on the topic of trustworthy AI. Are there particular types of standards you think that we should keep an eye on? Are there particular types of activities you think would be particularly valuable from your perspective?
Yeah. Why are you looking at me?
I don't know why everyone's looking at me. Okay, so first of all, I just want to say well done to everybody involved in getting us this far, right? Really, really should have actually a huge round of applause for just getting us to where we are right now. It's a really brilliant initiative, and again, showing the UK leading the way, which is brilliant, which is absolutely where we should be. So that's great. I'm looking forward, as techUK is, to getting involved and getting stuck in, because there's a hell of a lot to get stuck into, right? There's a lot in that presentation. So I think bringing people together and convening people together, we could definitely help with that and bring the wider industry voice into this work. I think providing that insight, providing information and guidance, and as I say, understanding the landscape, because it is changing. And it is moving quite quickly. But I think if the hub can help kind of maybe understand the landscape in terms of where, if you're working in AI, because it's not all just one big thing, if you're in the AI life cycle, if you're a developer or you're training or you're deploying or using or procuring AI, where you sit in that landscape, which standards apply to you. Because not all of them will, right? Not all of them will apply to everybody. And getting a bit, we were talking about this, Sam, getting a bit under the hub or under the bonnet of what that means. Where if you can help to provide a bit of that kind of clarity of, okay, well, if I want to procure AI, what are the standards? What do I need to think about? And where do I fit in the life cycle? I think that would be really helpful. That answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, echo absolutely everything. I think from the kind of businesses and startups point of view, I think one is kind of selling it to them. So really telling them exactly why they should be getting involved, why they should be participating, how it's going to really benefit their organization, how it's going to make them more robust, more reliable, all these different things. So I think that's something to be focused on. Also trying to get investors involved. As I said before, that's like like people say money speaks. Investors have a lot of power, and we need to be focusing on that because they hold a lot of power in their pockets. And then one last thing I would say is kind of thinking about like people's standard maturity in the education, because lots of organizations might have never actually approached standards before. What is a standard? Like, how has this come about? All of that kind of stuff. So I think something to think about is, where are people on this scale when they're approaching the hub, and how can you make sure that the hub is accessible to these different people?
I may or may not be exactly correct, but if I'm not mistaken, there may be a section on our website that exactly has the title of
I knew that already.
What are standards, or at least you know, the same meaning of title. So we have if anyone out there is interested in sort of that high level of introduction, if you go to the training section, there will be what is called the standards at a glance section that provides a very, very general light touch introduction, and then there'll be an e-learning module that goes into a lot more depth.
Me again. The market needs signal rather than noise at the moment, right? So even if you only did what you're currently doing, even if you only had the hub, and only if you just publicize what's going on, that would be a massive benefit to industry. So I think that's already the box is ticked. So I guess the question is what's next? I would say connection is going to be even more important going forward, right? So there's a lot happening in the standards landscape, and there's the horizontal and the vertical, and those two will meet at some point, and the touch points between those will be incredibly nuanced, and it'll be quite painful to reconcile those. If people are connected, and we know where the verticals are moving and where the horizontals are moving, that will make that connection much more stronger and make that process much more seamless. So, for example, P7001, I think there was a rep from that committee somewhere here I met earlier. But anyway, that's transparency, right? That looks very interesting from an X-ray standpoint, right? It's probably not exactly fit for purpose as it is for healthcare, but that is a base for us to work from to then develop a vertical standard. So again, having a forum for those conversations to identify those opportunities for where there is a parent standard for which the vertical could take a modification, that to me is the best way to get as much standardization, but not too much, such that you get homogeneity rather than having that heterogeneity represented. So I think that would be what I'd be pushing you guys to do, which I think coincidentally is hopefully exactly what you plan to do. It's like we've coordinated prior, yeah.
Great, yeah. No, that goes back, to the strategy earlier in terms of, and precisely one of the reasons for why we're starting with the horizontal, to then be able to in a position to inform vertical discussions along the lines of what you just described. Yeah. Sam, your final words to wrap up the panel.
Yeah, as I said, well, I think our focus around the sort of the principles, as I mentioned, I think could be really valuable. And I think that the point here around sort of target audience for this work is really important. I think sort of looking around this room, this feels like quite a clued up audience who sort of know quite a bit about this stuff. As was just mentioned, there's a lot of people out there who just don't have the confidence to invest or sometimes, as we've seen, are purchasing sort of off-the-shelf technology that isn't suitable for what they should be doing. So I think really thinking about how you engage with those audiences, particularly around the training and capacity building side, I think could be really valuable, and I'd definitely encourage you to do that.
Great, thank you very much. And we very much look forward, to continue working with all of you on the training side, on the engagement side, in addressing all of those challenges and shaping the hub's work going forward. So thank you so much. This has been really, really, really interesting. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. And hopefully see you on another panel before too long. Right, yeah. Excellent. So I think the final element in the agenda is simply to provide some closing remarks to conclude today's event. I'll keep it very brief. I think there's a lot, we've shared hopefully a lot, to look back at. We also, of course, don't want to hold you and prevent you for too much longer from actually taking a detailed look at the website once the event is over. So I'll keep it very brief, but just like to reiterate, first of all, how much we appreciate the fact that you joined us today. It was a real milestone, as we mentioned at the outset, for us. There was a lot of work over the last year to get to the point where we are. So it's really a point for us to celebrate, and we're glad that you joined us for that. But in many ways, of course, this is just the beginning. We talked about the engagement we did in the spring, but that was, of course, a small drop. And in many ways, in all ways, really, the Hub's work is only just beginning. And we very much hope that you'll join us on the journey that's ahead, both in terms of engaging on the website, the online community, on the slide. For anyone who is still looking for the URL, if you go to AIstandardshub.org, that's the platform. Have a look around at the different materials, the databases, the e-learning offers, the discussion forum. Register for a free account. It should be quick and easy, and it will give you access and the ability to use a whole range of interactive features that you wouldn't be able to use without an account. Sign up for our email newsletter, and then if you're interested, watch out for the live events that will be coming, especially along the 3 topic areas that we discussed earlier within Trustworthy AI: transparency, explainability, safety, security, resilience, and quantifying uncertainty. We very much hope you will be part of these concrete activities, but we also very much hope that you will help us inform the more general direction that the Hub's work is going to take going forward. So as already mentioned on the website, there's a dedicated forum called Shaping the Hub. That's a space for you to share any more general thoughts in terms of the kinds of activities you'd like to see. And it includes particular vertical interests, for example, because as mentioned, that's part of the long-term agenda, is to add vertical thematic areas to the horizontal area, and will of course be guided by your interests in terms of what those verticals will be and in which order we will start working on them. So very much hope to see you again very soon, online, in person, or on the community forum. And if you're active on social media, we've got the Twitter account. Hopefully soon we might have a LinkedIn account. Stay connected. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon.
He said all the things I was going to say, so all I have to do is say thank you very much again for joining us in person and online. Please spread the word. I think that's the other thing to say. It's great if you all go off and do things, but actually we want more people to be involved. And the very final thing to say is, for those in the room, there is a networking reception. For those online, go and grab a cuppa and have a look at the website and keep in touch with us that way. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen.